So prior to working at Paddle, I actually had my own SaaS company. We decided to expand internationally, and obviously the European market was quite attractive to us. But the nature of sales-assisted billing, that typically it relies on bank transfers. Usually, in most cases, they want to do that in a local currency. We had to effectively have structures and bank accounts and cash accounts set up, but once you start doing that, you create this web of companies that then have different systems and different processes, and it was also quite difficult for us to get real-time visibility over what was happening across the company at all times. So we were founded in Australia about 7 or 8 years ago. So pretty early in the life cycle of the company in Australia, we decided to expand internationally, and we actually moved our company from Australia to France. We kept the entity HQ in Australia, but moved ourselves as people over to Europe. So we needed the ability to effectively send an invoice in both GBP and Euro, and that required us to then also be able to receive funds in both GBP and Euro. So in the UK, it was a little bit easier for us. We were able to open a British bank account with GBP through the Australian company, so that bank account was still owned by the Australian company. The problem still existed because we were doing all of our invoicing through the accounting software that was linked to our Australian bank account. There was no automatic integration between that cash account in GBP and the Australian accounting system. So every time we were sending invoices out in British pounds, when they got paid, we had to then manually transfer that data back into the Australian accounting system so that we could track what had been reconciled and what hadn't been reconciled. We could maintain it, but it wasn't without sort of manual burden. In Europe, things were even more challenging. We actually had a really big customer in Europe who wanted to pay us quite a lot of money. They would only pay into a European-based bank account, so we needed to have a European entity to open that European bank account. So what we actually did was we opened a subsidiary company in France that then had a requisite bank account, and that enabled us to then sign contracts with larger customers in Europe. But once you start doing that, you create this web of companies that then have different systems and different processes. There's probably a few bits of advice here. The first one is to do your research, I think. So one mistake that we made was that we went to France expecting that things would just work. We didn't really have a good understanding or do our research properly around what we were going to be required to do and set up and pay for when we did that. What type of customer do you have? Because that will definitely impact their willingness to pay into foreign bank accounts, to pay in foreign currencies, and the dynamic of all of that. If we were to use Paddle, we would have been able to bill both in GBP and Euro without having to open any accounts in the UK, without having to open an entity in France, without having to open a bank account in France, and all of that would have been completely taken off our hands, and that would have saved us a lot of money in fees, but also a lot of money in time. The reason for that is, as a merchant of record, Paddle handles all of the banking infrastructure and payments infrastructure. Therefore, all of that cost is offloaded from you, and you can go about focusing on your product, focusing on your business, and focusing on serving your customers in that particular market.